Hi, I'm Neil Creek, and welcome to Crystal Law role-playing game. I thought I'd give you a basic introduction to the rules that make up the game, so that you have an idea of how this all works and you can enjoy the game. So this rule system was invented in cooperation between myself and a friend, and the friend is the person who came up with the basic concept of the maths and the roles and how they all work. His name's Danny. He's a graduate, a master in game theory. So I've built everything on that basis, and it works really well as a foundation. So the key behind all of it is this. It's a six-sided dice, but it has pips on three of the sides. The other other three sides are all blank. So it's a six-sided dice, but essentially it's like tossing a coin. You'll get a result of 1 or 0. So we haven't really got a name for the rule system, but we kind of call it like a binomial system, or I suppose you could say it's a binary system. So all rolls in the game are done using this dice or multiples of it. And you get two types of rolls, and all rolls are opposed rolls. They're either opposing an opponent's roll or a difficulty level that I, as the GM, determine. So for example, you might have a skill of, say, 5. So that means you'd be rolling 5 of these dice for that skill. So if you roll it, you can see there we've got a result of 4. We have 1 blank and 4 have come up with 1. So let's say that this is your attack roll. You might be up against an opponent. And that opponent, in order to avoid being hit by your attack, they will roll a dodge roll. Let's say that their dodge ability is 4. They would roll 4 dice. In this case, the result is 1. 4 beats 1, you got a successful hit. If the rolls are equal, then the defender gets priority. So if you roll an attack of 4 and the defender rolls a dodge of 4, then that means the dodge is successful and your attack missed. The genius of this system is that the results of the die rolls are on a normal distribution. That means you're far more likely to get the results in the middle of the range and far less likely to get them at the extremes. That means that critical failures and critical successes happen less often, but they're more important, more impactful. The other cool thing is that all skills are based on use. So let's say you had that dodge roll of 5, you rolled it, and you got a result of 5. That's a critical success, and it means that your dodge skill has now gone up by 1 level. It's now level 6, and you'll roll 6 dice for that from now on. So as you can see, it means that progression starts quickly at the lower levels because it's much easier to roll a critical of 4 dice than it is to roll on 6 dice. So progression is fast in the early stages and slows down significantly as you increase in level. So it has the effect of making higher levels harder to get to. It also means that you go up levels higher and faster in skills that you use frequently. So what happens if you're rolling against a situation where there's not an opponent, it's just an inanimate object? Say, for example, a thief trying to pick a lock. Well, in that case, you don't roll against the lock's roll. You roll against a difficulty that I, as the GM, determine before you make your attempt. So I'm thinking that this is an old lock, it's a rusted lock, it's on, say, a prison cell in a dungeon that hasn't been maintained and it's been there for a long time. That means the locking system is not as good, it might be easier to jiggle around and get out of. So I'm going to say it's a difficulty of 3. If the thief has a pick locks skill of 5, then I don't roll for the difficulty. I've determined the number in my head of being 3. So the thief then rolls and sees if they get 3. In this case, they did get a 3. So it's successful. Now, I said before that if there's an equal, then the defending roll wins. But in this case, it's not a defense. It's a limit. I've set the difficulty level, and that's what you have to reach in order to succeed. So if you get that 3, then you're successful. Some skills can be modified by difficult situations or advantages that you find yourself in. The problem with that, though, is if we just say roll an extra dice, then we can't tell which of the dice that were rolled are your skill, and it therefore makes it harder for you to increase that skill because you have 6 dice that you have to get ones on instead of 5 in order to increase your skill. So in order to work around that, I created modifier dice, and they're a different color. So that means that your skill is 5 and your modifier is 1. Let's say it's a +1. Let's say the thief is rolling with extra high quality tools, and so they're easier to use. That gives them a bonus on their roll. You then roll all of the dice, and the result is what's shown on the numbers. So in this case, the thief rolled a 1. Even though they had a bonus of +1 dice, that's not a +1 bonus to the result. It's an extra dice they get to roll. Sometimes you might have a negative adjustment. You might have poor tools, or you might be under a stressful situation, trying to pick a lock in the middle of a fight. I'll decide then that the situation makes it harder for you to do that, and so the modifier you roll will be a negative, and you take the result of this die off your roll. So for example, in this case, we rolled a 1 on the modifier, and we rolled a 1 in the skill. So that means the result was 0. So that was not a good result, but at least it wasn't a critical failure. Because the player rolled a 1, even though that was negated, it still meant that it wasn't a critical failure. If it was like this, and there was a critical failure, well then that would mean that something bad happened. And that's where I get to use some of my creativity and some of my storytelling, and I decide an effect that might occur on a critical fail. For example, the lock pick may break in the lock, meaning it's impossible to pick that lock again. The same thing can happen though with the critical success. Before, when we rolled a critical success, that increased the skill of the player, but there is also a positive effect in my discretion as GM. In this case, there's not really much that could happen as a bonus for successfully picking the lock. If the lock was picked, then you got to do what you wanted to. But say, for example, it was an interrogation roll. You were trying to get information out of someone and you rolled a critical success. Well, in that case, it may have been that you got more information than you were expecting. And so there was a bonus to what you were intending to achieve. So that is the basic fundamentals of the rules and the dice rolling. Everything else is built upon that. So it's a pretty straightforward system. So everything after that is essentially just extrapolating with logical and rational rules that I've either determined ahead of time or that I make up on the spot that fits and works well with the story and makes the game fun. But if you understand these fundamentals of rolling dice with the normal distribution and opposed rolls versus an opponent's roll or a difficulty, once you've got that down, that's the basics of the whole game. And from there, we can build an entire world and an epic story.